Welcome to the All Ambient podcast, where we dig into the creative process, hear untold stories, and explore the brilliant minds behind some of the finest ambient music out there. I'm your host, Mike Graff. I'm excited to be in this together with you. Let's get going. Here we are, folks, the All Ambient Roundtable. Glad to be here together with you. Cannot wait to dig into what we talk about this week. There is a balancing between creating music for the streaming world versus music for the licensing world. There's no one right way to do it, but there are a lot of mindsets that you can adopt and approach along the way that will have a definite impact on what you do and why you do it. We covered a lot of ground, and it's going to be great to dig into this together with you. Here we go. Let's launch right into the roundtable. Well, welcome to the All Ambient Roundtable, everyone. Man, I love these guys. I really do. Thanks for being here. Ben Tatlow, Kirk Smith, Marshall Usinger. Glad to be here together.
Great to be with y'all.
I am also glad.
Great to see you.
Thank you.
We were just shooting the breeze a little bit about just stuff. But man, before we start digging in, I am just reminded that, man, there's just so much value to being together, really. I know we're virtually, we're connecting, across different points of the country, different points of the globe. I'm just reminded how great it is to, not just to bounce stuff off other human beings, but when you're a composer, when you're a producer, when you're an artist, it can turn into an echo chamber a little bit if you don't actively pursue connecting with other human beings. And I'm really glad that we're here together. So I really am. Yeah.
Thank you,
Nothing
Michael.
more profound about that. Not trying to sound all wise or anything. I just know that I really value the time that we have together. And we always talk about great stuff. And I love everything that all you guys are putting out into the world. Yet another great layer of it all is that we get to hang and we get to, we all get to grow from each other. So I love it. It's great. It's great. Well, I think we're just going to cannonball right into this one. I'll try to not tee it up in some sort of subversive or ominous way. We have talked about bits and pieces of this particular subject before, and it's not anything that's new to any of us. It is something that it's kind of a line or a seesaw that we balance all the time. But I have been asking myself a lot recently, the idea of music for licensing, music for streaming. Music for licensing and streaming? Yes, this is the question. Music for licensing, music for streaming. What do you do? Can both? Okay, I've got a whole lot of questions. This is going to just kind of come out rambled, but all of it is sort of attached. Maybe if it's like one of those, like a spider web diagram where there's like the center thought and then there's like all these little pegs that are kind of attached to it. I've got this idea of like music licensing and music streaming. Can both of those roles exist well within the same moniker? Is one of my questions. And then they kind of branching out from that is, if I ask myself, like, how does writing for licensing influence how I think about what I'm creating versus writing for streaming influencing how I think about what I'm creating? And is there one of those goals that maybe serves that goal really well, but doesn't serve the other one very well? Like if I'm focusing on writing for streaming, does it maybe not translate to licensing as well? Or if I write for licensing, does it maybe not translate to streaming as well? And then I think this is sort of a loaded question across the whole board, because all of us in this space are doing really well in the streaming world and in the licensing world. And so I'm not trying to create problems where we don't have problems, but I do want to ask myself, I want to make sure that I am approaching what I do with integrity. And I know that you guys want to do the same. And so I just as opportunities pick up in the streaming world, as opportunities pick up in the licensing world, I am curious how you guys handle writing towards one or writing towards the other, or do you just write and then we figure out where it goes? And do they serve each other? Do they combat with each other? That is what I want to explore. And again, we've talked about bits and pieces of this just in side conversations or even in past conversations around the roundtable, but I wanted to specifically pick this one apart and talk about if the two entities butt heads with each other or if they maybe dance with each other a little bit more cohesively than I'm making it out to be. Yeah, talk me off a ledge a little bit, because right now it feels like they're at odds in my head, but maybe they don't have to be. So what do you guys think?
I think my immediate answer to all of those questions is yes, the short answer. Yes. And then I think we'll kind of pick out all the nuances of how that works.
Sure.
But I have a story that I think helps. And
it was
pretty monumental for me early on. I used to write for film, like meaning they would give me a cue and they would give me a brief and they would tell me, and then I would do like a spotting session and I would decide, okay, at 2 minutes and 2 seconds on this cue, I need to have an emotional change. And so I have to aim for this thing and then write my piece according to that. And my tempo and my instrumentation is all based on this thing. And it's fun and it's great. And I was learning how to do it and growing and like, okay, I'm going to be a music composer for film. And like, this is what I want to do. And then I remember being in like a giant workshop with like a composer guy. And, he's a teacher and a composer and he's talking about all these things and these chords and these techniques. And I'm writing notes. And then he tells this story about this composer who like went out into the mountains or went to a cabin and he studied Gregorian chants for 6 months. And that's all he did was study Gregorian chants. And then he came back from his cabin and he wrote this suite of pieces. And this was in like the 60s or the 70s or whatever it was. And like 3 of the tracks were on like 6 or 7 of the next giant movies that next summer or the next year. And I was like, wait a minute. So this guy just studied music he was passionate about and then wrote music that he just wanted to make. And these directors just like found the song and put it in their movie and cut to picture. And then he collects a check. Wrote, like, I was like,
yeah,
wait a minute, you can do that? Like, what? And like, honestly, like my mind was blown.
Sure,
like I was like, oh, I want to do that.
Yeah.
I want to write the music and someone else cut it to picture. And if it's inspiring, then they'll tell their story with that music. Like, I want to do that. That's all I want to do. And that's personally, for the most part, that's all I have done. Now, I will say there is a complete skill and beauty and craftsmanship of scoring to picture, of maybe writing a couple themes or writing a couple stuff, but then actually hitting the mark and going after the thing and developing the cue and stuff like that. And it's awesome. It's fun, but it's a totally different thing. I think people can do both, and they do both, and they probably should do both. But I think some people want to do one and not the other. So you can kind of choose your own adventure. But I think we should and could talk about the tension when you're kind of in a service-based industry under a director or thinking about a playlist or thinking about a licensing company or thinking about streaming. But at the same time, there is a point where you're just like, I'm just going to write what I want to write and then see what it could fit with,
Love it. So good.
When you were describing that initially, Mike, and also what you were saying, Kirk, for me, the crux of it is, are you writing for people or are you writing for an algorithm? Like, I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with writing for an algorithm. Hey, this stuff does really well on Amazon Music. This stuff does really well on Spotify Radio or whatever it is. That's fine. Then you are not writing for people. And then I think you've got a tension between the streaming world and the licensing world. But if your kind of core thing is, hey, I'm going to write this piece of music, exactly what you're saying, Kirk, which I believe and I think is really beautiful. It's kind of some of my inspiration at this point in time. Then I don't think there is anything, and it's writing for people. So you know that the people who enjoy your music are likely to like this. I don't think that's then at odds with getting that licensed. Tangentially, I would say that some of the tracks that I have been a part of writing, whether solely or in kind of collaboration with other people, the ones that I have kind of known at the point, right, this is really, really strong and has done really well with people, either on streaming or on YouTube videos or whatever it is. Those are the ones which also do best licensing wise. So I do think ultimately there is something about you write something really strong and it's gonna go well on both sides because people want to either listen to it or people want to use it in their videos, creations, whatever it is.
Yeah. I think that they can coexist in the sense that you were saying, Mike, I think back to, we had a conversation recently, I don't know which one it was, but kind of, we were talking about, just being early on in our music making and how there's a lot of innocence and creativity, and you don't maybe critique all the things that you're doing. And as time goes on, you start to think a lot more, right, about what we're doing. Sure. And is this track going to go somewhere? Is it going to, go on a playlist? And we start to learn all these things and tweak and tweak and tweak. And my unique story just into, how, I ended up here was just making music that I liked. And I've told you guys, we've talked about that on a podcast here and there, is like being inspired by film music, learning how to make music that I really liked and was kind of like emotionally impactful. And then I just connected with a licensing company, and that's like, so for me, it's like that journey was kind of like one and the same, where I didn't at the time really know about how licensing sites worked and all that, but I was making music that I enjoyed. And I would say when I had kind of the more free spirit of maybe like not taking myself seriously as like, okay, I'm going to be an artist and be on Spotify and release EPs or anything like that. It's just like, well, I'm making music that I enjoy, and it seems to resonate with other people. And then I think that, to also your point, Ben, is then that did well on, with people using it in their videos, because, and they liked it. And I think all that to say is I miss just being able to maybe not have that inner like struggle as much as like, oh, well, can I do this with licensing? Or, because now I overthink that stuff, all the time, is what am I going to do with this, or where's this go and whatnot.
Yeah.
So that was like just a unique time for me, where you have just that kind of, you don't know everything about what's going on and how all that stuff works. And there was like I really enjoyed just being able to be like, okay, I don't have to be like stylistically limited. I can make different genres, and that can get used in all different kinds of videos. But of course, you kind of, you meet different people and network and work with different people. And then you start to kind of learn all those things. And then you kind of have to like compartmentalize all of it seems like. But I sort of just miss the time of where, there was a little bit, there was some good coexisting happening between those things. So, I don't know. I don't make as much licensing stuff anymore, but I think that's also because, I guess to a point, it does get like, how do you keep it? You have to keep that exciting, right? With like, how much of that stuff can you make and what inspires you now? And it just all changes over time. So, that's where I'm at with it, dude.
I like it.
Maybe there's a distinction as well between kind of writing music very specifically for licensing in genres that hey, that's going to do really well on this kind of like cheery, happy, whistly kind of advertorial-esque YouTube video, versus writing really strong music that also does really well licensing-wise because it's just a great track. And I feel like that's where you can kind of have that coexisting in many senses. Like, you write a really great track, all being well, it does well in both lanes. But for sure, there is stuff that you can only write really from a licensing perspective that does well in this type of video. And then there's also stuff from a streaming perspective, which is like, you write something very sleepy and chill. Maybe that doesn't do well from a licensing perspective, but it does do really well on various playlists on Spotify or whatever. So maybe it's kind of like almost a Venn diagram of that.
Or not just Spotify.
Yeah.
Not just,
I think I've worked with enough different licensing places where I like when it feels like whoever it is that you may be in contact with, or whoever's hiring you for a particular spot or whatever, I like when they play to your strengths, like, right, when it feels like people know who you are as sort of what you're, either the music that you kind of excel with, or, the things that are creatively inspiring to you, and then allow you to kind of like run with that. I know there's many guys who can do all genres. I am not one of them. I have like a limited few genres I can do. And I feel like that also translates really well when you can work with someone who's like, we like your sound because of XYZ. Let's kind of utilize that and take that and use it to maybe something that, is specifically more for a wedding video, or, something like this where, it's not a streaming track per se specifically, but you're kind of like, you're using both those things. So it's like, in a way, it's like allows you to be creative, even though you have the mindset of making something for licensing.
Yeah. No, it's really good.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that bats around in my head on this whole thing is that if I had to pick one or the other, I think at the end of the day, I would want to, and kind of going to what you were saying, Ben, like certainly write for the people, right? Like write for those who are actively choosing to make this a part of their life, like the music that I make, that they're saying like, yeah, I want this as a part of my life, which is great. And whether that's them specifically looking up Dear Gravity or that's them listening to me passively on a playlist and not hitting the skip button when my song is on, they're choosing to let this music be a part of their life, which is great. I love writing to that because it feels like I'm meeting kind of to what Marshall was saying, where like the genres that I operate in, and like it feels like this is a genuine artistic satisfying of what is inside of me. Like there it is. It's been really, I'm really proud of it. It's really great. And I really enjoy that. And I'm really grateful for the momentum in the lanes that have gone well. I do ask myself every once in a while if I am doing that at the expense of missing the opportunity to take care of the licensing community and maybe people that even look to, because there's plenty of people who license all of us, but there's plenty of people who license Dear Gravity, but maybe is it at the point where there are people who are looking to me as Dear Gravity to do something that I'm not doing for them because I'm more looking over at this other lane? And is that an okay thing? And so I'm letting that beat around my head a little bit. But, and maybe I'm about to answer my own question. There is one licensing company that has just flat out said, hey, like we want to release music from you. We want to do it exclusively on our platform. But so with this licensing company, I've done, it's not a ton, but I think I've done maybe 3 or 4 short EPs, maybe 3 songs tops, maybe even less than that, maybe 2 songs or 1 song. And while I am really grateful for the request and for the contract that came together and for it to be something that really benefits the licensing company, I listen back on those songs, and those songs are and again, maybe it's all in my head, but those songs are the ones that I'm just like, oh, like it like, I know it's me, I know it's Dear Gravity, but it just feels not quite there. And that's, I think part of that is, just, okay, hey, you submit this. And then there is that dialogue, that back and forth on, okay, this is cool. Can you build it up more here? Can you pull this back a little bit? Can you do this different? And that's not a bad process. But when I listen back on it, I'm again, and you guys can call me on it if you think I'm just being dumb about this, but I hear the requests and the requests that have been satisfied and they're like, cool, this is great. We're going to release this. And now I've got some distance from it and I listen to it again and I'm just like, that doesn't sound 100% like me. Like I would do things differently if I was the one making the final executive decision calls on these things. That right there is enough to give me the taste in my mouth that says I have a hard time writing specifically for licensing because maybe I've just got this wrong idea in my head of what people who are looking for great licensing music actually want. Maybe I need to deconstruct that in my head a little bit and kind of redefine how I can do a really good job with that. But yeah, I'm wrestling with the tension on the stuff that I have written. And I've written plenty of stuff in other lanes and whatnot for licensing, and that's great. It's absolutely great. But for Dear Gravity, we're just kind of examining this one in particular for the stuff that was written specifically for licensing to be the stuff that I look at. I'm like, it's not quite as cohesive into my full catalog as I would hope it would be. So that's what I'm wrestling with right now. And hence kind of the conversations about, are you able to serve both well, or where does it? And really, I mean, I'm going to shut up now because I want you guys to keep talking, but it sounds like it's not even so much about the final product as it is about just your mindset and about how you approach it and what are you going to do? What are who are you going to serve in that? I think that probably has a lot more to do with it rather than what the actual creative output feels like. But I'm going to shut my mic off. Go for
Mike, shut your mic, Mike.
Shut your mic, Mike.
Shut your mic off the mic.
Do you think that in some senses this is also a kind of conversation about monikers and how one approaches that? Because like, I guess my response to what you say is kind of yes. From my side, I try to not release. I kind of split my monikers between ones which I see as artist monikers, and those are like, this is the music I really believe in. This is a true reflection of who I am.
Sure.
And it's writing for the people. If that does well in streaming, great. If it does well in licensing, great. If it doesn't, fine. It's the stuff I want to write and it's what I believe in. And then I have other monikers where my mindset is more of a production music mindset.
Sure.
It's not to say that they're throwaway tracks. It's not that I don't spend time on them. I often spend a lot of time on them. But my mindset is not, it's writing for more of a purpose. So some of those are writing for streaming and it's saying, hey, no, I want this to see if I can make this do well in the more of a, I don't know, sleepy ambient vibe. Or for example, with Grey North, it's like, hey, we want to do well in the licensing space.
Yeah,
This is just kind of more cinematic music for that. But I'm not seeing it as a kind of artist project. It's more of a like, hey, I'm writing for
Correct. Yeah.
film. I'm writing for TV in that sense. And so for me, that's kind of how I approach it. I have a bunch of projects which are essentially either for streaming or for licensing. I see them as a production music kind of catalog that I'm building up. They happen to be on streaming, but if they weren't on streaming, that's kind of fine. And equally, if the ones which are writing for streaming weren't on licensing, that's fine. And then I have one or two kind of really main projects where I'm like, no, this is me. This is what I want fully to be about. And kind of, I then don't think so much about the streaming or the licensing numbers. Does that kind of tally with what anyone else does?
And I'm going to put you on the spot here just a little bit, is that I love that approach. And I think that's really healthy. That would then answer the question. Again, this is putting you on the spot. That would answer the question, can both goals coexist within the same moniker to serve streaming really well and serve licensing really well? I don't think your answer is no per se, but it seems as though your approach is from your angle, from the artist angle, that you are going to focus this one. You're going to serve streaming and you're going to serve licensing. And then like there will be blur, there will be kind of, crossover, but the way that you are keeping a healthy mind about it is I'm going to approach with this in mind, and then whatever happy surprises, happy accidents come, in addition to that, cool. But
yeah,
I'm hearing you right on that.
Yeah, I guess if I were to segment it into three things, you've got on one side, you've got streaming. On the other side, you've got licensing. Both of those have kind of artist monikers, which I kind of attach to them. And then I guess in the middle is like take Antarctic Wastelands or Narrow Skies or Salt of the Sound, which would be my three kind of main projects. Those are artist projects. I'm writing for people. But because I feel personally that I'm putting some of my absolute best work out in there, quite often what happens is those tracks do well on streaming and on licensing. And so you end up with the artist project, the one that you are fully just writing for people, doing well in both lanes. So that's kind of why initially I was like, I think you can do both in one, but for sure then there also alongside that exists lanes or monikers in my case where I am writing for one or the other primarily. And then for sure there's sometimes some crossover, but those are kind of the focuses. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, sure does. 100%. Yeah.
So yes. And this makes me think of another particular site. Maybe Gavin could put like a over when I say this, but these people, what have you, whatever I shall call them, I don't follow much anymore. But back when licensing was different than it is now, what I think a lot of aspiring people making music, and I don't even want to say production music, just making music in general, wanting to pursue being an artist, is that these guys were taking on very high quality artists who were making music that they like to make. It wasn't written for this stuff. They were just licensing these albums. And so I think that was a time where there was like kind of a happy balance because it was set up and structured so that was at the forefront of, we're not just having these guys create music so that we can just put it on our site. We're really invested in these artists. We're, bringing their albums onto our site, and then people are using them in their different projects and films and so forth. And that was always that was the goal. I mean, I know for me and many of the people that I worked with in those circles was like, you'd love to have your music on this platform, but it was almost like at that point in time where I was, it kind of felt like you had to be at another level to where you were releasing stuff that was, had an audience and, was well received and kind of already had, some traction. But I think like that was a really unique thing where I don't know, it almost feels like a separate conversation of like something like that versus, royalty free production music or whatever you want to call that. Cause that's a whole other lane in itself where, I think is probably more in line with where we're at with this specific conversation is, can that exist in like the royalty free lane? But, something like that, Ben, where, it kind of has a different level of, I don't know, people took it more seriously, I guess, when you see these artists that people have fan bases and things like that. So for what that's worth,
Mm-hmm.
Definitely.
Just made me think of E.T., John Williams' score for E.T. And, of course, John Williams being one of the most wonderful composers ever to lock music to picture and does a great job at it. But I remember as he was writing kind of the final piece that Steven Spielberg had sort of asked him to write for the, the climax of E.T. and that whole thing, is that this guy who very much writes to picture and, hits his spots and this and that. Like, I'm maybe going to botch the story a little bit, but at some point in composing this final thing, he just kind of had, just went on a whim and fleshed out this full, it's operatic. It's between like 8 and 12 minutes long, if I'm not mistaken. But like, it's just this beautiful thing. And he's trying to figure out like, how are we ever going to like chop that? Like, I just love it. And, part of this certainly stems out of the relationship that Steven Spielberg had with John Williams and how much they trusted each other and all that. But Spielberg heard the piece and he was just like, oh, we're not chopping anything. I'm going to cut everything in the final chunk to just hit all the points of this beautiful piece of music that you just made, which was something that wasn't the case through the other 80 minutes of the movie. It's still very much that same relationship. And here's where we need you to crescendo and here's do this and that. But then in that moment, it kind of switched at the end and the music very much directed the scene as opposed to the scene directing the music. So yeah, I think sometimes even those who do really well within those confines, you can even find yourself in a fun situation where you're like, well, things are going to change a little bit. And, props to Spielberg to recognize that and to be like, man, I'm going to set aside my ego a little bit and just acknowledge how much of a banger piece this is that Williams just wrote and let me lock my picture to that. And so anyway, Kirk, you were going to say something though.
Yeah, well, that's beautiful. And I think that can help us come all the way around of what we're talking about, because essentially that's people writing music for people. And it's directors cutting movies for people and serving each other, to where there were points where John Williams was cutting pieces of his music and shortening things, or he was writing music for people. It just so happens that people was Steven Spielberg. That was the people he was writing. Like, he was serving that guy to serve his vision, but he was also doing his thing. And there was a point at which Steven had to serve him in finding ways to cut the scene in a way that worked, that preserved the music. And like when you were saying you were having your experience writing for licensing, it sounded more like you were having your experience writing for licensors as opposed to writing for licensing. And it was the writing for licensors that made you say, you walked away from that being like, I don't know,
right.
I think
you're spot on. Yeah.
Because I had a similar experience.
Sure.
Where you felt like you were just trying to serve the client. And if they're happy, if they like it, I love it. There's artistic integrity and you like it. But that sentiment sometimes gives you that taste.
Yeah.
And then when you're talking about, Ben, talking about people, it's like writing for people sometimes is thinking about these filmmakers or these guys who make this stuff on YouTube. Like, those are the people I'm writing for sometimes, or I'm just playing a movie in my head when I'm writing. And I'm like, oh, this seems like right here is where they finally walk out of the door and they see the light. It's like I'm writing music for movies in my head that maybe somebody will make, And so there's that person, or maybe it's that person who just needs to have a quiet morning, or maybe it's that person that needs to have a wind down session or meditation session or sleep session, whatever. It's like, so there's when we write for people, that person could be a director, that person could be a filmmaker, that person could be somebody who's praying. It could be, so it's like, then there's as many pieces of music as there are people. And we write for ourselves. We are the people that we write for also, essentially we're saying those things. And so if we need monikers to give us buckets to help us sort through all the people in our life that we want to serve, then that's fine. If sometimes I approach it from an EP standpoint, like this EP, I'm thinking it's going to be in this vein. This EP might be in this vein. sometimes if I'm trying to get my head around a bigger project, I might say, I feel like making some more dramatic cinematic tracks, but I don't want every track to be like that. So I'll just mix it up. And it gives me a filter to serve multiple people. Mostly sometimes just so I don't get bored, and sometimes so that I feel like the project is diversified, which makes it good later on, and that's fine too. And and in the end, it's like, John Williams is trying to serve his person, but he's also trying to be artistically fulfilled. Yeah. I don't think there's compromise in that if there's trust and integrity and communication. And then sometimes, there might be compromise in that, and then be like, well, but I just wonder with these guys, even John Williams, Hans Zimmer, that they hear back cues that were cut and edited, and they're like, that's not how I would have done it, but it's really beautiful and it's fine, And so at that point, it's like you kind of have to get over yourself, or you might say, well, maybe I shouldn't have done this track like that, or I should have. It's like, okay, we get to make music, it's a miracle. Yeah. It's amazing, and so we try to serve the best you can, but also just do the things you like to do.
Yeah, that's a great spot to end for sure, man. I love all the perspectives around the room, and I think really for us each to walk away knowing it could perhaps, to someone listening in on this conversation, maybe even feel a little bit cloudier at this point than when we started, but not in the sense of there are no good answers, period. I think the statement is rather more, there are a wide variety of answers, and it is worth it to you to ask yourself some of the deeper questions about everything we've already talked about. What does your heart resonate with? Who do you want to serve? Like, who are you writing for? And for those to be some of the plumb lines that allow you to make decisions that steer you. And then again, like, be it what it may, there will be pleasant surprises along the way, and something will cross over to this side or this and that, and something will inspire another thing, which is great. But for us to feel that we have stewarded what we've been given well, not in a selfish way, but rather in a, like, the thing for me to say yes to, the thing for you to say yes to. I think that's the right call. And it might mean that one has less monthly listeners than everyone else for a while, or it might mean that one has more licenses or less licenses, or, like the silly metrics or whatever. But my heart would be that each of you and everyone listening in on this is thriving in the way of, I am running after the art that I have been called to create, and in process on finding the best delivery methods, if you will, to the world, or whoever those sources might be, whoever those specific entities that we're writing for might be, that we create what, in fact, we were called to create. So that's that. Love it. Awesome. Love you guys. Appreciate you so much. Thanks for sticking in. And until next time, we'll see you soon.
Love you too,
guys.
Cheers, guys.
Thank you for listening to the All Ambient podcast. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast so you can catch every conversation we have with all these incredible people who share the same passion. I'm looking forward to the next time, and I hope you are too. Can't wait to see you then, and until then, have an incredible day. Here's hoping this music and the heart behind it makes your day and life that much better. We'll see you next time.